1. Okay, so this is a weird story I don't talk about very often, and honestly still creeps me out today. So my family and I went on vacation to California when I was a kid. We stayed in a fairly regular hotel. There was nothing special about it. It was our first night and we had just got in. My family had one of those adjacent room pairs where you can walk into the other hotel room through a door, if both rooms open their respective door. This door was on the far side of the room by the windows. The rest of the room was very standard, hall entrance with a bathroom off the side, 2 beds, etc. We all went to sleep that night with no problems. I was sleeping in the bed on the hallway or bathroom side of the room. My dad and little brother were sleeping in the bed next to the window. I woke up at some point in the night and noticed a small figure the size of my little brother standing halfway between our room and my mom's room next to our TV. I could make out the outline of the figure in the moonlight, shining through the window. I thought it was my little brother, so I start saying, "Peyton, get back into bed." He didn't move. "Peyton, get back into bed." The figure slowly shifts into my mom and sister's room. "Peyton, get back." My dad interrupts me. "Peyton's right here next to me, shut up." At this point, I'm mind-fucked. I would have written this experience off as a dream, but it got weirder. I'm still a kid, 12 to 13 years old if I remember correctly, and scared of ghosts, and I'm convinced at this point I may have seen one. There's no chance in hell I'm going back to sleep. I lay there for like 30 minutes alone in my hotel room bed, and then something happens. I look at my dad and brother's bed and notice they're slightly illuminated, as if someone was shining a shitty flashlight on them from the hallway door entry area. I'm paralyzed with fear. I literally cannot move, I'm so scared. The light goes off. I continue to sit still. I don't know if I can trust myself at this point. This shit was all so weird that I figured it had to be a dream. It just doesn't make any sense. 10 or 15 minutes pass and I'm still laying alone in my bed, wide awake. The light on the bedside table between our beds comes on. My dad gets pissed. "Jackson, turn off the lights." I tell him I didn't turn them on. The light stays on for a few seconds and then goes off. I guess my dad still thought I turned on the light, but we both saw it come on. I hop out of my bed like I was late for class and get into bed with my dad and brother. I've never been so scared. I manage to finally go to sleep next to them. The next morning we wake up and talk about what had all happened. We wanted to say it was all a dream, but we all experienced the light situation together, and that was the last thing that happened. It's not like we all experienced something, and then my fear had made me see things. We started to investigate the room. My dad realizes you couldn't turn on the bedside table lamp at the lamp. It's one of those hotels where the lamp comes on by flicking the light switch by the hallway door. None of us could have turned on the lamp. But that still didn't explain the flashlight experience I had. My dad looks in the closet by the hotel room door. There was an emergency flashlight mounted on the wall in the closet. I would love to say that I was just a stupid kid, and I was seeing things. But the truth is, when my dad and I talk about this, we both get chills. I'm getting chills writing this out. My mom and sister are still skeptical of the story, and everyone we've told it to thought we were crazy. I've got to say that's the weirdest thing that's ever happened to me, and I figured it would be perfect for this subreddit. Edit. Okay, I texted my parents to see where we stayed, and they said we had stayed at a hotel in Universal City. I looked up the hotels there but couldn't figure out which one it was. I texted my parents the list of hotels, but they haven't responded yet. Edit 2. My dad just confirmed that we stayed at the Beverly Garland Holiday Inn in Universal City. Edit 3. My mom thought it was Universal City, but my dad is now saying North Hollywood is the actual city name. 2. So here's a little background information. I had a blue parakeet named Jackie for 3 years, until he died from an abnormal tumor or cancer. He was very vocal and chirped and talked a lot, much to my father's annoyance when trying to watch TV. but my family and I sure as hell loved him. He was very attached to everyone and would be outside with us more than he would be in his cage. I was away when he died, and according to my brother, right after Jackie was cremated, he found 2 of his primary feathers just sitting side by side on top of the dresser. My brother asked everyone who was home at the time if they had anything to do with it, and they swore up and down that they didn't. Now this could possibly be that maybe Jackie's feathers are being found everywhere because it is only recently that he died, and thus his existence hasn't exactly been cleaned out. But what's very strange is that they were just placed vertically right next to each other, just centimeters apart. Sometimes I also keep thinking that I hear him say his name. We all lovingly called him Jackie Boy, and so that name stuck with him. And I kept feeling the slightest bit of pressure on my right shoulder, where Jackie would always be when he was alive. I would also like to mention that I had a dream where our newest addition to the family, a white female parakeet fondly named Luna, chirped and said Jackie's name. Perhaps this means nothing, but I can't help but keep that imagery near and dear to my heart. Perhaps it was just wishful thinking, but I was hoping that maybe Jackie knew that he was really loved, and that he loved us and just wanted to let us know that he was doing all right. He may have been just a parakeet, but I really feel that he was also pretty intelligent. I believe I'm starting to get to the point where I begin rambling. I apologize for that. If anyone has any questions or maybe wants to see a video or 2 of Jackie being cute, please let me know. Peace. 3. When I was 4, my family moved to a different house, not that old, maybe built in the 1950s. For the first couple of months that we moved in, every night we'd hear what sounded like a radio playing some sort of talk radio that was sort of staticky. We could never make out the words. We didn't even own a radio at the time, and only had one TV in the living room that was off. After everyone went to bed, you could still hear footsteps moving around the house, and more than once I would hear objects being picked up and dropped back down on tables. These things were scary enough on their own, but my room in particular had some interesting activity. Every night, at some point in the night, the handles, the kind on little hinges, would lift up and fall back down. Clink, clink, clink. Over and over again. I would also feel something touching my forehead, not firmly, but my bangs would move on my head. I slept with my head under the covers many nights. I had a toy called Warble that made noise and its eyes and nose would light up. But you had to touch it to make it work. It would randomly start going off in the middle of the night. I also had a teddy bear that had a little voice box that made it growl in response to you talking to it. The batteries had died years before. I think I was probably 8 by that point, and I'd shoved it under the bed. I'm in my room when I hear those weird noises start. It's this stupid bear talking to me. I didn't know what ghosts were at this point, and thought that some sort of evil Batman lived in my closet. Other things that happened in general in the house. The back door that had a deadbolt would be open when we'd come home from somewhere, and the lock was still latched. You'd see something white move across the room out of the corner of your eye. My mother said that one night she watched as her dresser drawer was pulled open and then reshut. My cousin from out of town had her braid tugged on 3 times rapidly. Things around the house would randomly disappear, including a whole loaf of bread. I was really glad when we moved out. It wasn't until years later that my mom finally told me that the woman that lived there before had gone crazy and tried to burn her house down. She was sent to the mental institution where she died, but her bedroom had been the one I'd slept in. Guess I'm glad they didn't tell me when I lived there. Still don't like Batman. I haven't had anything paranormal anywhere I've lived since. 4. My fiancé and I went to Japan recently for me to meet his family. He is Japanese, and I hadn't met them yet. While we were driving from one city to another, he pointed to something on the side of the road and told me it was a graveyard from before the Meiji era. Mind you, he's only been speaking English for about 5 years, so graveyard wasn't exactly the right word, but it was the closest one he could come up with. I started doing a little research and found out that there were several kofun in the area we had been driving through. For those of you who don't know what a kofun is, it's essentially an ancient monolithic gravesite that looks like a giant keyhole from above. The keyhole shape is completely unique to ancient Japan, and a chance to get to see one of these up close was irresistible to me. I wanted to experience as much of Japan's culture as I possibly could, and the older the better. We had been to a graveyard a week or so earlier to honor his ancestors, and inform them that we were getting married, and I hadn't been spooked at all while we were there. In fact, I have a certain degree of paranormal sensitivity, and I hadn't gotten spooked the entire time we had been in the country. This was unexpected because I normally avoid known haunted locations at all costs, because spirits and the likes enjoy messing with me, and I knew Japan was something of a cultural hotspot for hauntings. Since we were driving in the area again, I asked if we could stop at one of the kofun to look around. He agreed, and I turned on our pocket Wi-Fi, did a quick Google search, and found a lovely selection of 3 right off the main road. I picked one that had a shrine on top of it, so that it would be easy to find and identify, since neither of us were particularly familiar with the town we were driving through. It was easy to find because it was in the middle of town, and after a slew of buildings, there was suddenly a small patch of forest, with a torii gate right by the road. The lack of buildings didn't surprise me, as that wasn't uncommon around areas that had a shrine or a temple, and kofun aren't exactly small, so we parked next to the torii gate, and stop and take a picture of the informative sign identifying the location, and start to approach the shrine. According to Japanese culture, when approaching a shrine, you are always supposed to walk through the torii. It's polite, so we did. The air around us instantly changed. It felt darker than it had a moment before. I blamed it on the heavy tree covering. A flock of crows started complaining loudly. I assumed we had gotten too close to a nest. I started feeling painfully uneasy, but I mostly tried to ignore it. I have some anxiety problems, and it isn't unheard of for me to get nervous about nothing. And since my fiancée was acting normal, I ignored my nerves and went on to taking pictures of the surroundings. The closer we got to the shrine, the worse the feelings got. This was not the first shrine we had been to, and I didn't understand why it was making me feel uneasy. I said something to my fiancée along the lines of, "Okay, we can go now," when I was finished taking pictures. We wanted to get back to his parents' house in time for dinner. He agreed, and went to bow in front of the shrine, as is common in Japanese customs. I didn't follow suit because I am a Christian and wasn't comfortable bowing at the shrines, if I didn't have to. There wasn't anyone around, so I didn't feel like I had to in order to prevent anyone from feeling insulted. Normally I don't get too close to the shrines, so that I won't insult any of the worshippers by not bowing. I did the same thing here. As soon as he approached the shrine properly, I started feeling more and more uneasy. It felt like something didn't want us there, or more specifically, it didn't want me there. I asked him if he felt like something wasn't right. He said no, but he recognized that this wasn't just my normal anxiety, that I was picking up on something he wasn't. He asked if there was something going on, and I just nodded. So again, being Japanese, he approached the shrine to bow before leaving, but this time he walked all the way up to the porch-like structure before bowing. As soon as he did, I swear to God, I heard a child scream from inside the shrine. A tiny, abrupt scream, like it had been pushed down or something had happened that had cut off the sound. My fiancé clearly hadn't heard it. Otherwise he would have been freaking out and trying to get inside of the shrine to help the child. As soon as he turned around, I told him we need to get out of here, now. He asked why, but I wouldn't tell him while we were standing there. I just rushed down the uneven steps and back out of the torii gate towards the car, even though it wasn't the most direct route. As soon as we walked through the gate, everything felt normal again. Even the birds quieted down. I wouldn't tell him what I had heard until we had been driving for at least 5 minutes, because I didn't want to talk about it so close to the shrine. When I did finally tell him, he was quiet for a good long while, before telling me that he agreed that it had felt like we weren't supposed to be there, that it was wrong somehow. He also told me what he had read on the informative sign. It said that the shrine had been built several hundred years earlier than the Kofun, to protect against the evil direction. That sent a chill up my spine, but I asked him what he meant by the evil direction, thinking that maybe he had just misspoken. He hadn't. This was how he explained it to me as best as he could. Apparently, in Chinese tradition, the Huns had always come from the northwest when they invaded. As a result, that was considered the evil direction. That was a tradition that was brought over to Japan along with many others. That shrine had been built there to protect the town and keep evil from entering it. So let's put this all together. I heard a child screaming from inside of a shrine that is supposed to block evil from entering a town. That was built on top of a giant grave. Needless to say, I didn't want to visit the other Kofun in the area after that. I keep looking at the pictures that I took. They don't even look as dark as the area did to my naked eye that day. I keep expecting to see something in them, but I haven't yet. Any opinions on what happened would be appreciated. Update. I asked my fiancée for the name of the town we were in because I couldn't remember. It was Mibu in Tochigi Prefecture. We had to look it up again, but specifically, it was the Atagozuka Kofun. I can't find any information on whether the Kofun is supposed to be haunted or not. If anyone else finds any information on this subject, please tell me. 5. I should lead by saying I tend to lean towards skepticism when it comes to the paranormal. I 100% believe that paranormal entities exist. However, more often than not, I think people psych themselves out rather than have a genuine paranormal experience. In fact, that's why it's taken me so long to follow up in my situation. I'm reconsidering the weight of the situation now, based on the behaviors of people that have been around this artifact that I have, as well as some of the things that have happened to me when I was looking into it. About 2 years ago, I found myself volunteering at an orphanage in Uganda for 6 months. I decided to go out there as a way to recover from my alcoholism and move forward with my life. While I was in Uganda, I also ended up being involved with getting a primary school started and assisted in getting a non-profit off the ground. I was actually offered the position of operations manager at the non-profit when I left the country. And the school was named after my friend and me in our honor. The point is, I was working really hard to have a good future, and I succeeded in my recovery. In my last month in Uganda, a fellow volunteer gave me a gift. It was a Coptic cross that he had picked up in Ethiopia while he was on his way back to Uganda. I thought it was super cool and unique, so I got some string and fashioned it into a necklace to bring back to the States. I think it's important to note that the guy who gave it to me came from Trinidad and Tobago, and outspokenly hated Americans. We clashed occasionally, but we both understood that we came from different places and ideas, and just agreed to disagree. To be clear though, 90% of the time we were friends and on good terms. The very first peculiar experience happened to me about 6 months after I had gotten back home. I was in line to check out in a grocery store when a man who looked like he was from Africa, similar demeanor, clothing, etc. It's hard to explain, but when you've been in a place long enough, you can just tell. The man was just walking by when he looked at me, then at the necklace, then back at me, but this time with a look of absolute terror. At the time, I didn't think much of it, but it still stuck with me regardless. Before my second experience, I had some friends comment on my necklace. I was told that it had some sort of weight to it, and that something about it felt weird. I ended up asking some co-workers about it, since I knew some were heavy believers in the spiritual realm. After I took it out and showed it to them, nobody was comfortable standing any closer than 5 feet to me. They prayed for me and sent me home with a prayer book, which they claimed would keep me protected. At this point, I began to get paranoid and began recounting weird occurrences in my apartment. One example is my 2-week-long writer's block with my music production, which suddenly ceased when I moved the necklace out of my studio and into another room. I kept thinking of similar circumstances. The only problem here was that I couldn't quite convince myself that I wasn't falling victim to my own placebo. I also remember the very distinct feeling of being watched, and I never felt alone after that. One night, after overcoming my usual nightly restlessness, I fell into the comforts of sleep. The next thing I know, I had started a business in my hometown, a car wash actually. I was showing a friend the place and led us into the office. Everything in my office was neatly placed in its spot, just as it should have been. Suddenly a man appeared walking past the doorway that exited from the side of the office into a car wash bay. Everything about the man's appearance was average. What was unsettling, though, was that I could tell that he knew I was watching him, even though he wasn't looking at me. It was just a gut feeling. The man disappeared as soon as I got a good look at him. I walked out the door in an attempt to see where he went. The man was nowhere to be seen. I walked back inside the side door into the office, and everything was trashed. I looked over at my friend and said we needed to get the hell out of here. I led the way out the front door, and laying on the ground in front of my feet was a horse. The horse was barely alive and was quite clearly in excruciating pain. I noticed it was missing 2 legs, one in the front and one in the rear. I quickly realized that I was in a dream and felt my subconscious start panicking. I woke up sweating and terrified. Needless to say that sleep was not something I was going to attempt again that night. I was severely freaked out and decided to look into the possibility of a haunting. A week later, I found myself in the home of a spiritualist. I had made sure to leave the necklace outside to see if she could sense it as a sort of vetting process. I also made a point of it to be aware not to make any hints towards my experience, and more importantly, that necklace. She had told me that she felt the presence of a demon about me, and that it was not from the necklace I had left outside. Since I made sure not to mention anything that could lead her to know about that necklace, I trusted her reading. However, I politely left after she gave me an estimate of $200 to solve my problem. I know she needs to pay her bills too. I just didn't have quite that much money at the time. A week and a half later, I went to the office of my friend's pastor's friend. She was a Christian counselor who so happened to have some expertise on this subject. I'm not a Christian, but I figured that it wasn't really a big deal since not everybody in counseling is a Christian. So the appointment moved forward and I told her everything that had happened. She responded by doing some forearm muscle tests which revealed that there were 7 demons on me. She was able to relinquish 6 of them. And then things quickly escalated. Apparently the 7th demon was a tier above most demons, and can't be renounced without spiritual faith. I admitted that I wasn't a Christian, but leaned towards agnosticism. I didn't think it was a problem because I answered that question in the introduction packet she gave me when I first walked in. Long story short, she berated me for 20 minutes, told me I was going to be stuck with this demon until the day I'm a devout man of God, shamed me for coming to a Christian counselor without being Christian, and charged me more money than we initially agreed on. I think it's important to note that I don't think this is normal behavior for her. I obviously didn't know her very well, but the shift in her demeanor was huge. I honestly could hardly even recognize her when she got angry. Apparently she's been in business for years, and I can't imagine she would be even remotely successful if she went off on clients that were simply looking for help. I suspect it might have been induced, but nonetheless, I left her office hurt and angry. A week or two later, I decide to go out to Haiti to volunteer for disaster relief. I'm in my motel in Miami overnight, with a flight out to Port-au-Prince the next day. That night I woke up with sleep paralysis. I've read stories about it and realized it was important to stay calm and wait for the rest of my body to wake up. Suddenly my legs were thrown out from under me across the bed. My torso felt like it was being pushed around. The next minute consisted of my body being thrown helplessly around the bed, while I quietly prayed with all of my might. It ended abruptly, and I waited until the sun rose to relax. I ended up missing my first flight the next morning by a fluke. I booked another ticket the following day, but I was given the wrong time of my flight and I missed that one as well. I ended up not going. The last 6 months I've lost my jobs, isolated myself from my friends. I'm practically homeless, and I now have to file for bankruptcy. My ever so promising career in music is now gone, and I'm ashamed of myself because I never made it out to Haiti. Based on my story, do you think there may be any merit to paranormal interference? I can chalk up the nightmare to my subconscious thoughts, the sleep paralysis to muscle spasms, and everything else to paranoia. Yet the unexplainable could also explain everything. What do you guys think I should do with it? Can I bury it, melt it, etc.? Or will that just cause more problems? I'm kind of at a loss here. If it is dangerous, I don't want it to mess with anybody else. Final edit, June 18th. I drove up to a spot on a mountain that I know pretty well. I crossed 2 creeks and walked a mile into the forest until I found a spot that I could easily recognize. I had the cross wrapped in a cloth that I had drenched in boiled salt water and let dry. I also cleansed it myself before I left. I dug a small hole in the base of a tree and dropped the cloth-covered cross into the ground. I took out my Bible and read a select verse, prayed for it to leave me alone, and then addressed it directly. I demanded in the name of God that it will not follow me home or bother me anymore, and will be staying here. I came back home and I've only felt better. Granted, it's only been 2 days, but I've been acting more like myself. My productivity has improved vastly, and most importantly, I don't feel burdened by that feeling of being constantly watched. It looks like that did the trick. Though if I ever do need to get back to the cross, I have the exact coordinates memorized. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 5 True Paranormal Stories, episode 62. Thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. Okay, I think I'm just going to cut the outro a bit short in this episode. I just want to thank you all for your views, your likes, and so on. And I'm going to head off for now. I'm not really feeling my best at the moment. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourself.